What is something that came about during the COVID-19 pandemic that still affects your day-to-day life? Story 1. Wife, kids, and I planted a garden during the lockdown, a 10x5 in ground plot with maybe 4 or 5 things. It's now over a half-acre with raised beds, a large greenhouse and chicken coop, plus several heritage peach and apricot trees. We also ripped out every blade of grass and have turned the wasted lawn space into a pollinating garden. We have just noticed a huge beehive in the remnants of a dead tree on the back of our property. Story 2. I got to start working remotely 100% of the time. By my calculation, since March of 2020, I have saved a total of 83 fully 24-hour days, or 250 standard 8-hour workdays, that would have been spent doing nothing but commuting to and from the office unpaid and costing me gas and kilometers on my car. Story 3. DoorDash going from Rugly $7 more than going to the store to being nearly $50 for fucking Wendy's. I used to order Uber Eats and DoorDash while I worked out of the office, and it was very convenient. It used to be just a few bucks more. During the pandemic, these companies decided to lie to everyone and claim $50 for Wendy's was a good price. Story 4. My husband had heart problems due to COVID and stopped drinking alcohol. He was a casual beer drinker, but now our house is alcohol-free and I feel like it's been better for everyone because it's forced me to stop drinking too. I do have a drink every once in a while, but he's gone cold turkey. Our skin is really nice now, and together we've lost nearly 20 lbs. He looks fitter now at 40 than when I met him at 22. Story 5. It's so hard to see a specialist doctor now. Of course, I've always had the experience that you would call an office and maybe they would say the doctor isn't taking new patients. This was always common and I get it. But now, often the offices don't even have people to answer the phone and nobody returns the voicemails. Sometimes I will get someone on the phone to make an appointment and they will say they will get back to me and never do. Or, if the doctor can take me, it will be so many months out, the situation can easily get out of hand before then. And I am not talking about pulmonologists or cardiologists, who of course are extra burned out by COVID. These are gastroenterologists, endocrinologists, gynecologists, etc. Multiple times, I have had to call my referring doctor literally crying from frustration and begging them to call a specialist and advocate for me to just make an appointment. Each time, the specialist has had an appointment for me within a week or two, and they've all been great. But there seems to be no way to see a specialist these days without these backdoor methods. Story 6. Being forced to stay in the house all day reset my agoraphobia back to its worst. It took a lot of work and forcing myself out the house to be able to do normal stuff again, like go to work or the shops, or visit friends and family without feeling panicky. Some days it is still a challenge to walk places. I drive almost everywhere now, which means I also struggle to shift the weight gain that most of us got from lockdown. Story 7. Lack of socialization. I know most people here are saying they love working from home, but I didn't realize until COVID how paper-thin my non-work support system was. Most disappeared into their bubbles, and when they emerged, they were married, having kids, had wildly different interests or comfort levels going out, moved far away so they could raise their families, etc. That kind of stuff always happened, but I didn't realize how much just going to the office to at least have some regular human interaction kept me normal. It's also just harder meeting friends at work you can actually go do stuff with when they are all remote. Not that work is the only place you can meet friends, but when you spend so much time working with people, it does end up being a large source of your friends. Story 8. Long COVID. I already had fibromyalgia and scoliosis, and a few others. But I was still managing to do my own housework and was almost healthy enough to return to work when the pandemic hit. Now I'm going on beta blockers for tachycardia at 28, have been bedridden for 2.5 years, need carers to do everything for me, including wash my hair, but I drew the line at bathing, and am set to get a wheelchair in the near future. I spent 1.5 years refusing at home care, hoping I'd improve and keep my independence. Now I can't even walk 2 men with crutches, and I need a chair and grab rails in my bath, and other aids and appliances around the house. I even have to brush my teeth in bed because I can't reliably sit up long enough and often enough to do it in the bathroom without fainting. I have a first-class BA Hans degree I've never been able to use, and I likely won't ever get better than I am right now. I also went from having perfect vision to 6'9". I have a blurred optic disc and increased intracranial pressure, all caused by COVID. I took all the precautions, I was vaccinated and boosted, but having pre-existing conditions, I was vulnerable. COVID is only a bad cold for me, I never needed a hospitalization for the acute infection, but it still caused lasting damage. If I hadn't been triple vaxxed before my first infection, I might not be here right now. We still need to keep up with the jabs and practice safeguarding measures to protect people who are more vulnerable to catching COVID and developing long-term, worsened disabilities from it. It hasn't gone away. Edit. Yeah, I knew the anti-vaxxers would downvote this. I hope you get a fraction of what I got, and that your tinfoil hats will be laced with mercury. Story 9. Being able to work from home as a disabled person reduced the severity and frequency of symptoms I used to experience by working in office, and I've almost doubled the hours I'm capable of working each week, meaning I can live a relatively independent life. Literally life-changing. Story 10. Stores that dropped 24-hour availability and continued to blame workers and/or theft for their excuse. Like somehow those issues were never a thing for the past 20 years, and only after COVID did they become an issue deserving to alter company hours. Millions of late-shift people are just SOL if they need anything from the store now and have had to shift to online grocery shopping or delivery services just to get things done. Story 11. The biggest thing is that I am a remote worker now and have so much more time to make better meals, go out to walk, exercise, do hobbies, etc. COVID changed my life priorities completely. I used to be much more into working hard and climbing the ladder, and after all I could think of was how to maximize the things that bring me joy. The smaller things are, I no longer go out to eat as much as previously because of drastic post-COVID drop in quality service combined with increase in overall cost, both menu prices and tip. I am still uncomfortable in big crowds, very crowded places. I am very bothered by public illness and lack of hygiene now. I don't mean people with disabilities, I mean if you're snot-nosed and hacking up a lung at the grocery store, on public transit, etc., and making no effort to cover up, I get super annoyed. I also very much notice when people don't wash their hands properly in public restrooms. I never paid much attention before. My coping skills are not great, or at least exhausted more easily. Like I am fine normally, pretty happy and content with my life. I would say my mental health is better than most, particularly on Reddit. But compared to pre-COVID, when things get very stressful or go to shit, I cope less well, get more overwhelmed, frustrated, feel like I fucking hate people much more easily than I used to, mostly because I think people have gotten a lot worse with basic social niceties and driving, etc. My alcohol consumption has increased, still a moderate drinker, but before COVID I barely drank at all. Story 12. I got out of restaurants after 20 plus years, lived in a high mortality area with no protections for workers managing a restaurant. Coming to work every day worried that one of us was going to get sick, worrying about the families of the employees, truck delays, out-of-stock issues, frozen wages. I could have dealt with all of it if the customers in general were the same as they were before the pandemic. Instead, we got rabid, violent masses who would flip shit over the slightest thing. I couldn't compromise the staff, so I kept the dining room closed and ran Togo only. Customer got mad, went back to his car, and took pot shots at the restaurant. Another slammed on the door trying to get in so hard he broke the glass and started reaching around for the lock. Someone got so pissed off that they grabbed one of the kindest, nicest 16-year-olds I've ever met in my entire life and tried to drag them out the drive-thru window. My assistant managers had people follow them home. I had confrontations outside after the restaurant closed. A lady waited until one of my employees walked outside and coughed all over her. People pissed on the building, shit in the parking lot. Busted employees' headlights. It was one of the most stressful times for everyone, but when I saw that people couldn't even be nice for this, I noped out hard. Went back to school, slammed it out, now I'm a software developer. Just before I left, the franchise owner mandated us to open the store, even if only one employee was there. This is after I had asked for protections for the employees, or at least a raise above minimum wage. A couple of months after I left, one of our employees passed after getting sick. The restaurant didn't last long afterwards. Story 13. On a negative note, social anxiety spiked hard and hasn't come back down to normal levels. I just don't like crowds like I used to. On a positive note, I fell in love with my wife during COVID, and I joke we speedran our relationship because it was 2 years cooped up together and it just kept getting better and better. Happily married now and wouldn't change a thing, she is the best thing that has ever happened to me. Story 14. The conspiracy theory brain rot spillover effects. I'm trying to meet new people, but talking about the pandemic is extremely revealing into the content of their character. Like, no, I personally don't believe the vaccine or social distancing was all bullshit. as a new friend of mine revealed several weeks ago to me. I think it was to prevent ICUs from being overrun and get everyone back to work as quickly as possible. It's not even that they are a shallow person. They are a very kind person. It's just the disinformation and misinformation still influence the stories people tell themselves about what happened in the early 2020s. Story 15. Having to use an inhaler regularly now. My lungs were messed up due to COVID, also seeing a doctor more often. Before COVID, I rarely saw a doctor. Also, I'm tired all the time now. I haven't worked out since before COVID. Just cutting the grass makes me ache bad. Story 16. I lost my ability to mask, ironically because of masks. I'm autistic. Things like having my emotions display plainly on my face is more of a manual effort for me than someone who's neurotypical. It's essentially a social muscle I built up with huge effort since I was a kid. Being forced inside, wearing physical masks for years, atrophied my social muscle. I just don't have it in me to build up that social ability again. Story 17. Cooking. Prior to COVID, I was a horrible cook. I ate shitty food and was in the worst shape of my life. I was very locked down during COVID because I lived with someone who had recently been diagnosed with cancer and was on chemo. I started watching some cooking videos, then books, then started investing in some badly needed cookware. It has ignited a passion in me that will probably have the biggest impact on my life going forward. Learning that it is possible to eat delicious, healthy, and cheap feels like a cheat code for life. Story 18. Stores still suck. Every time I go to a store, they don't have something I'm looking for. Every time. They don't carry it anymore. The section hasn't been stocked in a week. They ran out earlier that day, etc., etc. There's always something. I get in the car and I'm like, why am I even burning time and gas to go there? They won't have what I need. And I'm always right. It would be great to just order everything instead. But shippers are trash now too. Impossible to predict when or if something will ship, when it will show up, and some asshole snatches it off the porch half the time. And oh yeah, either way the shit you need costs 2x more. Story 19. COVID ended up being the best thing for my career so far. I was slowly trying to transfer to the job I wanted, but then I was in a huge wave of COVID layoffs. Shocked and frustrated, I started applying to the job I wanted with no experience. I earned some experience by doing it for free. That experience landed me an actual job doing it while working from home with a different company. I'm never going back. Story 20. My relationship with work, remote work, and managing myself and my life. I think it's really a mix of work and developing confidence and self-worth as I've entered my 30s. I've also come to appreciate slowing the fuck down and not getting so caught up with all the rabble of life that other people deem important or worthwhile. I've worked for 3 employers since 2020. The first was hybrid, like 90/10ths, and we only went in once every 6 weeks for knowledge transfer. The next job was HQ'd out of state and was fully remote, aside from traveling on site to a customer for requirements gathering, training, implementing, etc., about a dozen times per year. My current job is 100% remote, except for an annual summit in Ohio at the beginning of Q4. I had a remote position for what I thought was my dream job in 2016-17, but I couldn't cut it and got the boot after 6 months. I couldn't manage without supervision or being around my team. It's silly because now I can't imagine having to go into an office or not having the freedom of flex time to take care of the things in my life that are really important. I no longer feel guilty about not being productive for a full 40 hours a week because when I looked back at my office jobs, I was hardly ever producing 40 hours of work in a week. Story 21. My entire career came to a grinding halt and hasn't recovered. I used to work all day and attend events many evenings. After going remote for work, I have had no interest in attending any of those events, nor working nearly as hard as I did. I miss having that purpose in life and that drive, but I am so much closer with my children than I ever was before, and I'll never go back. I do wish I could find a happy medium. Story 22. I'm finally happy again. COVID was at the peak of my depression and suicidal ideation. I was being severely bullied at school, I had no friends whatsoever, and I had just lost my cat, who was my only reason for living. Getting to stay home and not deal with the peer pressure, drama, and overstimulation of school, as well as getting some actual sleep, changed my life. I had time to get back to the hobbies I had before the anxiety and depression, go to therapy and treat a few medical conditions that were affecting my quality of life, and do some real introspection to figure out how I was going to move on and get to know the real me. Things were still bad when I was finally forced to go back, But those foundations I had built up during lockdown kept me from doing something I would regret. Story 23. Ridiculously overinflated house prices. Didn't a bunch of extra people die? Where's the extra inventory? It's the hedge funds buying everything. It's the millennials buying houses. I think it's just pure greed. The area I live in has seen houses that were $150K pre-COVID are now $400K. There aren't enough jobs to pay for a $400K house. Keep pricing out the people that take care of you and complain that no one wants to work. Story 24. I was set to go back to school in 2020 and leave working in retail behind me forever. However, the pandemic causing me to lose my job and the complete financial uncertainty caused me to pull out of school and forced me to take another retail job. With the added bonus of inflation and supply chain issues, customers are more horrible than they were pre-pandemic. Pain. Story 25. I went from working in office to working at home. It went from a temporary situation to a permanent one. It's bittersweet. I miss the in-office environment, but I also have been promoted to a position that did not exist pre-COVID. I lead a team that works across the country. None of them work in my home state. And I've met a lot of great people I wouldn't have had it not been for COVID. Story 26. Definitely some negatives, but it was largely instrumental in allowing me time to make a career change which doubled my salary, and a switch to working from home full-time, something I've always wanted. Generally, it ended up increasing my quality of life, at least in those aspects. I was being taken for granted and underpaid at my job at the time. I worked hard to learn a new skill to create something for them upon their request, with the verbal promise that I would graduate to a new role with a new salary once I had done that. I completed it. A date was given to me for my career change, about a year from then, which came and went. During that period is when COVID started and everyone went remote for a good while. I still went in office occasionally, so I asked for a meeting and brought up my promised career change, and all of a sudden the CTO who promised me these things was hit with a wave of amnesia about it, but I knew what my new skill was worth. Since I was able to work completely remote from home, I was able to put extra time and resources into job hunting and interviewing that I never would have done otherwise, due to being chronically completely mentally exhausted after a full day of being physically at work. It took me only about 3 months and many interviews, and I ended up with a few offers, eventually accepting one that paid almost exactly 2x my salary at the time. TLDR, COVID was the catalyst for a chain of events that lead to me being able to leave a company that was taking advantage of me in a role I was growing to dislike. Being forced remote gave me extra time to market new skills said company was taking advantage of, and I landed a fully remote gig in a role I enjoy much more for 2x my salary. Story 27. Every trip to an indoor space now involves risk-benefit analysis, as does every trip on public transit. 2 things I used to enjoy were concerts and going to the movies. I won't do those anymore. I don't want to spend a bunch of time indoors among strangers whose COVID mitigation strategies I don't know. Concerts in particular seem high risk. Bunch of people all shouting/singing/cheering in a crowded bar or nightclub. No thanks. I won't go to a space like a bar or a coffee shop or a mall to hang out either. If I go to a mall because I need a thing, I go in, get the thing, and leave again. No lingering or window shopping. I try to time my use of indoor spaces for times when it's less crowded. Ditto for using public transit.